Today, we're talking about something huge, how women time and time again have just completely refused to play the roles society handed them. And by doing that, they didn't just change their own lives, they ended up changing the world for all of us.
Seriously, take a second. When I say those words, what's the very first image that flashes in your mind? Is it a man? A woman? Be honest with yourself. It's a pretty simple question, but the answer tells us a whole lot about the quiet, invisible ideas we all carry around.
All right, let's really get into this, because those mental pictures, those stereotypes, they don't just come from nowhere. They're built up from a very young age. We're going to look at how these stereotypes draw these invisible lines and how reality, as you'll see, often tells a completely different story.
Okay, so check this out. A teacher, Rosie Ma'am, actually did this exercise with her class of 30 kids. And the results? They're pretty wild. For a nurse, every single one of the 30 kids drew a woman, no exceptions. For a farmer, all 30 drew a man. A pilot, 27 drew men, only 3 drew women. It just goes to show you how early and how deep these ideas really take root. So remember how every single kid drew the farmer as a man? Well, get ready for this number to completely flip that idea on its head. 83.6%. That's the percentage of working women in India who are out there in the fields doing agricultural work. We're talking planting, weeding, harvesting, the whole deal. So our mental image is just completely wrong. The reality is so different.
And this is so important because challenging these stereotypes isn't just about numbers on a page. It's about real people, incredible individuals who just refuse to be put in a box. So now let's talk about some of the people who didn't just bend the rules. They broke the mold entirely.
This is Lakshmi Lakra. Her story is amazing. She grew up in a poor family in Jharkhand. Her parents couldn't read or write, but they fought tooth and nail to make sure she got an education. She worked hard, got a diploma in electronics, and then she became the very first woman to drive a train engine for India's northern railways. I mean, think about that. She literally took control of a machine that society had decided was only for men.
And this quote? This was basically her life's motto. It says everything you need to know about her. Anytime someone told her that's not for girls, it was like a green light. They said electronics wasn't for girls, so she did it. People were shocked to see her riding a motorcycle at her polytechnic, but she just kept on riding. Her entire life has been about turning "you can't" into "just watch me."
But here's the thing. These rigid ideas aren't just a problem for girls. They lock everyone into a tiny box. For girls, there's often this huge pressure to see marriage as the end goal. And for boys, well, take a student named Xavier from our source material. He was pressured to get a high-paying job. He absolutely loved history, but his parents were like, no, do math, do computers, there's more scope there. He had to push aside his passion for what was seen as the correct male role. See, stereotypes end up limiting everyone.
So, where did the change even begin? How did women start pushing back? For so many, the entire fight for equality started with the fight for one incredibly powerful tool, the ability to read and write. It all started with education.
And this wasn't something that happened overnight. We're talking about a struggle that went on for centuries. Way back in the early 1800s, you had women like Rasha Sundari Devi, who literally had to learn in secret. And then, by the late 1800s and into the 1900s, you had pioneers like Rokeya Shikawa Hossain who weren't just learning, they were building a new future for others.
Let's start with Rasha Sundari Devi. To really get how amazing her achievement was, you have to understand the world she was living in. It wasn't just that girls didn't get an education. No, it was believed that if a woman learned to read, she would bring bad luck, that she would literally cause her husband to die and become a widow.
I mean, can you just imagine that level of fear and superstition? But her desire to learn was so powerful that she started her education completely in secret. After she was married, she carefully tore out a single page from her husband's religious book and hid it away. That one page, it was both the most dangerous and the most precious thing she owned. She didn't have a teacher. She didn't have any help. Instead, over years and years, she would painstakingly match the letters on that stolen page to the letters she remembered seeing her own son practice for his lessons. It was this slow, secret, determined process, and she did it. She taught herself to read. She would go on to write Amarj Ban, the first autobiography we know of by an Indian woman, giving us a peek into a world we never would have seen otherwise.
Now, fast forward almost a century, and you have Rokeya Sakawat Hossain. She faced different kinds of barriers. She was born into a wealthy family, but she was forbidden from learning English. Why? Because English was seen as the language of radical ideas, ideas that weren't suitable for girls. But with the secret help of her brother and sister, she mastered it anyway.
And what she did with that knowledge is just mind-blowing. In 1905, she wrote a story called Sultana's Dream. Get this, it imagined a place called Ladyland, a utopia run entirely by women, with incredible inventions like flying air cars and machines to control the weather. And the men? Well, they were kept in seclusion because their weapons were too aggressive. This was basically feminist science fiction written before most girls in her country were even allowed to go to school.
But Rokeya wasn't just a dreamer and a writer. Her education gave her the power to act. So in 1910, she started a school for girls in Calcutta. She turned her vision into a real place that could empower others. And you want to know what's really amazing? That school is still open. It's still running today.
And that brings us right up to the present day. The struggles of women like Rasundari and Rokeya blew the doors of education wide open for millions. But the story's not over, not by a long shot. The chapter on equality is still being written.
So, how do we know where things stand today? Well, we have hard data. A lot of it comes from something called the census. It's this huge official count that happens every 10 years in India, and it gives us a really clear picture of what's happening with things like schooling all across the country. And this is what that data from 2018 tells us. Just look at the numbers. You can see how the percentage of kids who leave school just skyrockets between primary school and secondary school. It goes from around 4% to over 17%. But now, look at the columns for scheduled caste and especially scheduled tribe children. For ST kids, the dropout rate at the secondary level is almost 25%, 1 in 4. The doors to education might be open, but it's clear that a lot of kids are still being forced to walk away.
So why? Why is this still happening? Well, a lot of the reasons are built into the system itself. In a ton of rural and poor areas, there just aren't proper schools, or there aren't enough teachers who can be there every day. And what we see is that kids from Dalit, Adivasi, and Muslim communities are the ones who are hit the hardest by these gaps, creating this cycle of inequality that is just incredibly difficult to break. So we've kind of come full circle. A pen, as a symbol for reading and writing and knowledge, it gave women like Rasundari and Rokeya the power to completely change their world. The challenges today look different. It's not always about just getting access, it's about getting real equity and support. So the question that leaves us with is this: what's it going to take for us to finally finish this chapter?